Can you tell me what it's been like for you to get clean and sober while having a dual diagnosis?
It's been very perplexing and confusing. I actually I don't think I got diagnosed until I was about 10 years sober. And things were very, very difficult. I had come to the point where drinking wasn't an option anymore, but life wasn't good enough for all the work I'd put into it, and I started casting around for answers, and I came up with dual diagnosis. And when I got help with those issues, things started to improve.
Okay. So that even though you experienced sobriety, your depression made your experience seem not worth it at some level? It's kind of like, why should I stay sober if I'm feeling so blah?
Yes, absolutely. It seemed like other people felt okay. Why me?
Yeah.
Welcome to Bay Area Psychology. Tonight, we turn our attention to a population which is surfacing in growing numbers in chemical dependency and mental health programs across the country. I'm referring to the dually diagnosed, people who are struggling with the dual disorders of chemical dependency and mental illness. Traditionally trained addiction and mental health counselors are scrambling to confront their own treatment bias and limitations. They're forced to collaborate to form effective treatment plans for these challenging populations. This collaboration has resulted in groups like the Dual Diagnosis Network, founded by tonight's guests, CADCII Bowe and Ginny Cutler. I want to welcome both of you to the show tonight. I appreciate you making the time to be with me. We opened with a clip of a woman who was sharing her experience of 10 years into sobriety, discovering a diagnosis. And I'm wondering if that sounded familiar to either one of you.
The thing that was familiar about it was that that was a long-term problem. But the thing that was so remarkable about it was that she had 10 years of sobriety.
That's right.
Struggling with the depression. That's incredible.
Isn't that she stayed sober anyway? Yeah, I imagine that in your experience, people in fact don't work 10 years before they find an answer, that perhaps their sobriety tends to be shorter-lived.
Oh yeah, and we get people, a lot of times this is the first shot at sobriety. They've been in and out of jail or in and out of the court system. Suddenly they're homeless. They've never really taken a good shot at sobriety. Okay. And when we look at it and we find out they're truly diagnosed, we see why. The real difficulty accessing AA, the difficulty understanding what really is the problem. So we end up, in working with people, realizing it's going to be a very long haul, and it may be, you know, a year or two down the road until they're really able to grasp a sobriety at any rate.
Okay. So what, the two of you founded this Dual Diagnosis Recovery Network, what, about a year ago, I think?
It's almost a year and a half now.
Yeah, a year and a half. So tell us a little bit about how you found there was a need for this.
You go.
Okay, I'll go. Kathy and I were working in a couple of programs specifically for the dual diagnosed. It was a research project, and it ended. When the program ended, the clients didn't. We still had all kinds of clients, as well as lots of training and lots of education, and we were seeing more and more dually diagnosed around us than we ever had before. So the two of us struggled to maintain the treatment that we were maintaining in our little niche, and trying to do it together by building relationships with providers out in the community, whether it be sponsors or drug and alcohol programs, both residential and sober living environments, whether it was private mental health practitioners who were willing to do it for a real low fee. We just developed these relationships, and through those relationships we were actually able to get our clients the services and the help they needed, which we couldn't provide with what we were trying to do.
And how was that, Kathy, in terms of finding other referral sources or other treatment providers? I mean, a year and a half ago, how sophisticated were the surrounding resources?
The thing that was incredible about it is that as we were doing the research, we got more and more people who were dually diagnosed, and consequently we had to negotiate with the community a lot more. And what we found were that there were lots and lots of providers in the community who were seeing the dually diagnosed population, but were as desperate as we were for resources and answers and understanding of the problem. So when we were connecting with people in the community, everyone was seeking to find out more about what we were working with and how to do it. So when we finally decided to offer a network, we had many, many people in the community eager to participate and find solutions.
So you really, really touched a need. Let's take a look at one of the possible reasons people may not have understood this diagnosis. Let's take a look at our first graphic. Chemical dependency is a serious illness, separate from other major mental disorders. Treatment of clinical depression, for example, will not cure chemical addiction. I know that in my travels, one of the biases in traditional mental health has to do with the fact that people are addicted to alcohol and drugs because of another major mental disorder. So if I treat my depression, I'll stop wanting to drink. And so I think, I don't know if you encountered that, but that's sort of, you know, that the solution would be more mental health treatment would probably take care of this. Did you encounter anybody who had that bias?
We encountered the gamut, actually. We encounter it from that side, from the other side. One of the things that I noticed early in the network was that those working in the alcohol drug community, for a lot of, in a lot of instances, didn't even realize they had dually diagnosed, but they knew they had people that they weren't helping.
Okay.
The people that weren't getting it, they weren't able to keep them sober, and they didn't know why. So some of them were coming to the network realizing that there has to be something else going on.
Okay.
And the same was true from the mental health community. We've been working with the dually diagnosed forever.
Yes.
And people just didn't know how to identify this. And because the psychiatric community is more geared toward treating an illness and thinking of the person as a sick person, we have not embraced the concepts of 12-step recovery or chemical dependency recovery. So when we treat someone with a psychiatric disorder, we just try to treat that disorder and hope that everything else falls into place.
Okay.
And we see that as the only part of the person that we've been able to work with.
Okay.
So there's been just oh, that person is less hopeful than this person because, look, at their lifestyle is problematic. They, you know, engage in chemical use that hurts them, and we just don't give them as much help or don't feel that we can.
Yeah, I know when I was going through graduate school, ironically enough, I had figured I would never work with addiction because part of the training that, or the message I got, whether it was overt or not overt, was that in general, working with addiction was pretty hopeless.
Right.
And that had to do with the fact that traditional psychiatric interventions had not worked.
Right.
That people would go to therapy for 8 years, 10 years, and still be drinking more than when they began.
Right.
And so I remember feeling initially when I was getting my training that, you know, I would not, why would I ever want to specialize in that particular specialty?
Sure, and if you're doing psychotherapy with someone and they don't get better, if you're providing medications and the symptoms don't abate, you think that it must be the person's fault.
Right. Right, so you saw some of the kind of blaming the client as not being ready, not being willing.
Well, the other ironic thing that I think Kathy would agree to is that as we began to use the 12-step community and the social recovery model, we could look at those individuals as working towards recovery. We took that concept and put it towards our chronically mentally ill and said these guys can be working towards recovery. They don't have to just be maintained. They can they're certainly not going to be cured, neither illness is going to be cured, but they can work towards recovery.
Right. So that turned out to be a very hopeful addition. Let's take a look at the other side of this bias in our second graphic. Mental illness, such as clinical depression, will not be cured by abstinence from alcohol and other drugs, more 12-step meetings, or working the steps. It requires intervention by counseling and possibly medication. That, you know, maybe it occurs to me that when you said initially in the program that you had chemical dependency counselors who were discouraged, it could be that, you know, that sort of chronic relapsing client has, you know, we used to tell them they don't want it enough, they haven't hit their bottom, they need a spiritual awakening, and really prescribing more of the program which wasn't working.
And becoming more and more confrontive because they were more and more resistant.
That's right. That's right.
Or being accused of using or drinking because they weren't getting better.
Or if they had a problem, a setback.
Right.
Yeah, if they had a setback, it must be that they're experiencing some level of relapse. So when you go into that and you talk to the providers and you do some training, do you find that they're relieved to discover there might be another reason for this relapse other than willingness?
Well, because we find that the adage or dictum or whatever it is, whatever works, really is infused in the 12-step community. So we have found for people who participate in our network, open arms, whatever works.
Okay, whatever works.
And a lot of anxiety that they don't know enough, which I think is a lot of what we're talking about here, is how to fill in those voids for people.
That's right, because traditional chemical dependency counselors, are not trained to understand clinical depression or major anxiety disorders. I mean, we usually see those as part of the detox and early recovery. It's like, well, of course you're depressed. Your life's a mess. You've been drinking for 25 years. Of course you're anxious. Your wife just left you. And really differentiating, I still think that that's not something we totally understand. How do you make a decision early on, other than someone's history, really, that it's an anxiety disorder versus early detox kind of feelings?
A lot of individuals are dually diagnosed are so complex because the problems have gone over many, many years. And the picture just gets muddier and muddier and more difficult to diagnose. So we need time. They need time.
When we first started talking about this subject a long time ago, we were looking at it as differential diagnosis. We were always trying to see which one was the real problem. Was it the drugs and alcohol? Was it the mental illness?
Right.
And we always were trying to find a way to separate them. And what we've done with the dual diagnosis direction that we're working in now is understand that they go hand in hand. They can't be completely separated. They both need to be addressed.
And then for treatment purposes, it doesn't matter which came first.
And in fact, that reminds me of kind of progress we've made in terms of therapeutic interventions like brief therapy, for example, where it no longer matters how the problem got started, okay? Just, what's keeping it going, and that's where you intervene. And that actually sounds more hopeful in some ways, because it gets so tangly over time that it is hard to find out. I want to ask, right before the break, and when we come back, I want you to address the fact that people say, well, how come we've got more dually diagnosed people right now? How is that a fad, or what is that? So we'll talk about that. Do stay with us. When we return, we'll hear another first-person account of this difficult struggle.